Imagine the ultimate betrayal. You wake up at your own funeral, unable to move, unable to speak, but fully conscious as mourners surround your body. The grief seems genuine, the ceremony meticulously planned, until your husband, the king, steps forward with an announcement that shatters everything you believed about your marriage. As Queen Eleanor lies motionless, forced to play dead while dignitaries pay their respects, she overhears whispers that unravel a conspiracy spanning decades. The coffin meant to be her final resting place becomes instead the birthplace of a terrible revelation. Not only has she been betrayed by those closest to her, but the very foundations of her identity, as queen, as wife, and most devastatingly as mother, may have been built on elaborate lies crafted by the man who vowed to love her. What would you do if you discovered your life was a carefully orchestrated deception? And what terrible secret could be so dangerous that someone would poison a queen to keep it buried forever? The castle hall was shrouded in darkness, save for the dim glow of hundreds of candles that cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and fresh lilies, mingling with the somber chants that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Knights stood like silent sentinels along the walls, their faces grim beneath their helmets, while nobles dressed in their finest mourning clothes dabbed at tearful eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. In the center of the grand hall, upon a platform draped in the royal colors, lay Queen Eleanor. Her delicate body was adorned in her most magnificent gown, a masterpiece of crimson velvet and gold thread that had taken the royal seamstresses 3 months to complete. Her auburn hair, once the envy of every lady in the court, was arranged meticulously around her pale face, crowned with the royal diadem that sparkled in the candlelight. Pearl-encrusted slippers peeked from beneath the hem of her dress, and her hands were folded gracefully over her chest, clutching a single white rose. She looked peaceful, beautiful, and unmistakably dead. Except she wasn't. Beneath her closed eyelids, Queen Eleanor's consciousness stirred. First came sound, distant and muffled as though traveling through water, then growing clearer with each passing moment. The mournful chanting of monks, the quiet sobs of ladies in waiting, the shuffling of feet against stone. Then came sensation, the weight of her crown, the stiffness of her formal dress, the coolness of the air against her skin. Horror flooded through her like ice water in her veins. She was alive, trapped in her own body, present at her own funeral. Eleanor's mind screamed for her limbs to move, her voice to cry out, but her body remained obstinately still, betraying only the faintest tremor in her fingertips beneath the delicate white veil covering her hands. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but with tremendous effort, she managed to open them just enough to see through her lashes. Tiny slits that revealed the blurry shapes of mourners surrounding her. No one noticed. No one saw the minute rise and fall of her chest as she struggled to breathe without drawing attention. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Was she to be buried alive? Would no one discover her condition until it was too late? King Richard approached her bier, his normally commanding presence now bent with grief, or what appeared as grief to the assembled court. His silver-streaked beard was unkempt, his eyes red-rimmed. Eleanor had never seen her husband look so affected, not even during the Great Plague that had claimed their youngest son 3 winters past. Something in his demeanor struck her as strange. Was there guilt hidden beneath his sorrow? "My loyal subjects," the king's voice rang out, cutting through the chants and sobs. "We gather to mourn not just our queen, but the mother our kingdom deserved yet never received." The words pierced Eleanor's heart more painfully than any dagger could. 23 years of marriage, 23 years of trying to bear a living child, 23 years of whispers about her barren womb. Only 2 pregnancies had come to term, one stillborn daughter and one son who had lived just long enough to be named before God called him back to heaven. Today, as we bid farewell to our beloved queen, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger, "I must unburden my soul of a secret I have carried for 15 years. The hall fell silent. Eleanor could feel the collective breath of the court being held. What confession could be so important that it must be delivered over her supposedly dead body? "I have a daughter." Those 4 words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor would have gasped had she been able to control her lungs. A daughter? Richard had a child. Her name is Rosalind, born 15 summers ago to a woman I loved before my arranged marriage to our queen. I kept her existence hidden to spare Eleanor the pain of knowing another had given me what she could not, and to protect the stability of our realm. Each word was a knife twisting deeper into Eleanor's heart. 15 years. 15 years of Richard's gentle reassurances that their childlessness was God's will, not her failure. 15 years of holding her as she wept after each miscarriage, promising her that he needed no heir but her. 15 years of lies. Through her barely open eyes, Eleanor could see the shocked faces of the courtiers. Some nodded in understanding. Others exchanged scandalized glances. She noticed her lady-in-waiting, Catherine, press a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Was it grief for her queen, or did she know of this betrayal? Tomorrow, the king announced, his voice steady now, I shall present my daughter to the court and recognize her as my legitimate heir. The bloodline will continue. Our kingdom will not fall into chaos upon my death. A single tear escaped Eleanor's eye, sliding silently down her temple and disappearing into her hair. No one noticed this final proof of life. The humiliation burned worse than the betrayal. Not only had she failed as a wife in the eyes of the court, but now her funeral had become the stage for her replacement. In that moment, as the king continued to speak of arrangements and the future, something changed within Eleanor. The overwhelming fear of being buried alive receded, replaced by a different kind of terror, and beneath it, a spark of something unfamiliar. Rage. Not the fleeting anger she had felt during petty court disputes, but something primal and powerful. If she survived this macabre farce, and somehow she knew she would, what would she do with the knowledge of such betrayal? Would she reveal herself immediately and confront her husband before the entire court? Or would she remain dead and learn what other secrets might be spoken over her coffin? As nobles began to approach the bier to pay their final respects, Eleanor made her decision. She would remain still. She would listen. She would learn every whispered confession, every hidden truth that people would only share in the presence of what they believed to be a corpse. For the first time in her life, Queen Eleanor held true power, the power of being invisible while still seeing everything. And when the time was right, she would rise from the dead, bringing with her all the secrets of the living. The king placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, his beard scratching her skin. "Forgive me, my queen," he whispered, so softly that only she could hear. But a king must have an heir. Eleanor's heart hardened beneath her ribs. Forgiveness was the furthest thing from her mind. What burned there instead was a question that would consume her thoughts in the hours to come. What else had her husband hidden from her during their years together? The monks resumed their solemn chanting as the funeral continued, unaware that the woman they mourned was silently plotting her resurrection, and perhaps her revenge. The whispers began as soon as the king finished his declaration, spreading through the hall like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest. The grand chamber, moments ago shrouded in respectful silence, now buzzed with the hushed conversations of shocked courtiers. Eleanor, still frozen in her deathly pose, could hear every word as clearly as if they were being shouted directly into her ears. A bastard child to inherit the throne? Lady Margaret of Westmoreland murmured behind her jeweled fan to Countess Isabel. The neighboring kingdoms will never recognize such a claim. Perhaps she is not a bastard at all, the Countess replied, her voice barely audible over the resumed chanting of monks. What if there was a secret marriage before Queen Eleanor? The church has been known to annul inconvenient unions for the right price. Eleanor's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. A secret marriage? Could Richard have been married before their union? The thought had never crossed her mind during their 23 years together. If true, it would mean her entire life as queen, her very identity, was built upon a lie. From the other side of her bier, she heard the unmistakable baritone of Duke Harrington, the king's closest military advisor. "This changes everything, Your Grace," he said in what he clearly thought was a private conversation with the monarch. "The Eastern nobles will undoubtedly protest. They've been positioning Lord Edmund's son as your successor for years." "Let them protest," King Richard replied with steel in his voice. Rosalind has my blood. That is all that matters. And the Queen's family? The Southern Alliance was secured through your marriage, without the promise of their grandchild on the throne. The king's sigh was heavy with calculation rather than grief. Their mourning will provide us time. By the time they emerge from it, Rosalind will already be established in court. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with humiliation beneath her death mask. Even in their private chambers, Richard had never spoken of her with such cold pragmatism. To him it seemed she had been nothing more than a political convenience, a bridge between kingdoms that had failed to fulfill its purpose by remaining childless. The shuffling of feet drew nearer as nobles approached to pay their final respects. Baron Thistlewood, known for his sharp tongue and sharper business practices, bent close to the Earl of Shrewsbury. "The king must have planned this for years," he said in a voice thick with admiration. "To keep a daughter hidden away, educated and prepared to rule, while maintaining the illusion of the devoted husband. Masterful." "Indeed," replied the Earl, "though I wonder where the girl has been kept all this time. And more importantly, who is her mother? A noble, a commoner. 5 gold pieces says it was that dark-haired lady-in-waiting who mysteriously fell ill and returned to her family lands 15 years ago." Baron Thistlewood wagered with inappropriate glee. "Lady Catherine's cousin. What was her name?" "Lady Anne," supplied the Earl. "She was quite beautiful, as I recall." Lady Anne. The name struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Anne had been her favorite companion during the first years of her marriage, a gentle soul with a gift for music who had taught Eleanor the local folk songs when she'd first arrived as a foreign bride. Eleanor had wept when Anne had been sent home with a mysterious ailment that court physicians could not cure. Richard had personally arranged for her care. Now Eleanor understood why. "Her Majesty looks remarkably peaceful, does she not?" came the voice of Lord Chancellor Blackwood, the realm's highest judicial authority. "As if she merely sleeps." If only they knew how accurate that observation was. Eleanor focused on keeping her breathing imperceptible, fighting against the urge to scream or sob. Each revelation felt like another stone placed upon her chest, slowly crushing her beneath their weight. "Lord Chancellor," came the voice of Sir William, the king's most trusted advisor, "what will the official documentation state regarding the royal succession? The law is quite clear about legitimacy." A moment of hesitation followed. Eleanor strained to hear the reply, desperate to understand the legal implications of Richard's announcement. "The king has instructed me to prepare documents recognizing Rosalind as his legitimate daughter," Blackwood replied cautiously. "As for the question of succession, there will be a formal council meeting tomorrow after the burial." After the burial. The word sent a wave of renewed panic through Eleanor's body. She would be entombed while still alive, sealed away in the royal crypt, while courtiers debated the succession of a throne that was still rightfully hers. Her fingers twitched involuntarily beneath the white veil, but the slight movement went unnoticed amid the general commotion. "And what of the Queen's throne?" asked a voice Eleanor recognized as belonging to Lady Beatrice, wife of the kingdom's treasurer. "Will it remain empty until the king remarries?" "Remarries," someone else exclaimed softly. "Surely he would not consider such a thing so soon after Her Majesty's passing." "A king without a queen is like a ship without a rudder," replied Lady Beatrice, "especially with a young daughter to present at court. She will need a maternal figure to guide her." Eleanor's blood turned to ice in her veins. Not only was she being replaced by this hidden daughter, but her husband might already be considering which noblewoman would take her place as queen. Perhaps he had someone in mind already, someone younger, more fertile, more politically advantageous. From somewhere near her feet, Eleanor heard the soft sobs of her personal maid, Marta. At least someone truly mourned her, she thought bitterly. The crowd parted as Councillor Edmondson, the most senior member of the Royal Council, approached the king with obvious hesitation. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "with the greatest respect for this solemn occasion, the matter of succession cannot wait until tomorrow. The neighboring kingdoms already have their spies in our court. By dawn, word of your announcement will have reached every royal house from here to the eastern seas." A heavy silence fell over the assembly. Eleanor could almost feel the tension radiating from her husband. "What exactly are you proposing, Counselor?" the king asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The council must convene tonight, immediately following the vigil. We must establish Rosalind's legal status before foreign powers can formulate their responses. The stability of the realm depends on it." The king was quiet for so long that Eleanor wondered if he had walked away. Then his voice came, closer to her than before. "Very well. The council will meet at midnight." He raised his voice to address the entire hall. "Let it be known that any who question my daughter's right to the throne questions the divine right of kingship itself. The blood of 30 generations of monarchs flows through her veins, just as it did through mine and—" he paused, "through my queen's." The irony was not lost on Eleanor. Her royal bloodline, once celebrated as equal to Richard's, was now being invoked to legitimize the daughter of another woman. As the nobles began to withdraw to prepare for the evening's council meeting, Eleanor realized with growing clarity that her silence now was her greatest weapon. If she revealed herself, showed that she lived, what would happen? Would the court celebrate a miracle, or would she become an inconvenient obstacle to the king's carefully orchestrated plans? She made her decision. She would remain dead until she understood the full extent of the conspiracy around her. Only then would she decide how to reclaim her life and her throne. The question that burned most fiercely in her mind as the funeral proceedings continued was not just who this mysterious daughter was, but what would become of her own identity and power if she surrendered the protection of death's disguise. As the nobles retreated to the edges of the great hall, their animated whispers fading into the somber melody of the funeral dirge, Queen Eleanor remained motionless upon her bier. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest more heavily than the ornate golden pendant that rested there. The royal seal that had marked her as Richard's chosen queen for over 2 decades. Now that title felt as hollow as the empty womb that had been her greatest shame. The hours crawled by like wounded beasts. Lords and ladies approached in solemn procession to bow before her and place tokens of remembrance at the foot of her platform. Flowers, small scrolls of poetry, tiny vials of perfumed oils. Each mourner's face told a different story. Genuine grief from some, calculated concern from others, and, most disturbingly, poorly concealed relief from those who had always viewed her as an obstacle to their ambitions. Through barely open eyelids, Eleanor observed the hypnotic dance of candlelight across the vaulted ceiling. The flames swayed in unison whenever the great doors opened to admit more visitors, creating shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Court musicians played gentle lamentations on lutes and harps in the corner, the melancholy notes floating through the air like lost spirits. When the final hour of the public viewing approached, the crowd thinned considerably. Only the most devoted courtiers remained, along with the royal guards and a handful of clergy who would maintain the overnight vigil. King Richard had departed for his private chambers, presumably to prepare for the midnight council meeting that would determine his daughter's future and the future of the realm. It was then that Father Benedict, the royal confessor, approached Eleanor's bier. The elderly priest moved with the measured steps of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous waters between earthly power and divine truth. His weathered face was a map of deep lines and sunken cheeks, his eyes pools of knowing sadness. For 30 years he had heard the confessions of kings and queens, holding the darkest secrets of the realm within his silent breast. The guards stood at a respectful distance as the confessor performed the final blessing, his Latin incantations flowing with practiced precision. The ritual complete, he dismissed the nearby attendants with a gentle wave. "Leave us," he murmured. "I must prepare Her Majesty's soul for its final journey with private prayers." The guards bowed their heads in deference and retreated to the entrance of the hall. For the first time since she had awakened to the horror of her own funeral, Eleanor found herself alone with a single witness. Father Benedict leaned close, ostensibly to arrange her hands more perfectly upon the white rose at her breast. His breath smelled of mint and wine as he bent near her face, his lips almost brushing her ear. "Forgive me, my lady, but the truth needed to be revealed." Eleanor's heart lurched violently beneath her ribs. The confessor's whispered words were so unexpected that she nearly gasped aloud, nearly betraying her secret. "I know you can hear me." He continued, his voice barely audible. Your secret is safe with me, as all secrets have been throughout my service. A mixture of terror and relief flooded through Eleanor's veins. Father Benedict knew she lived, but how? Had he observed the minute rise and fall of her chest? Had he seen the tears that had escaped despite her best efforts at stillness? I cannot linger long without raising suspicion, he whispered, adjusting her veil with gentle fingers. But you must know that I was forced to break the sacred seal of confession. The king. He hesitated, his voice catching. The king has planned this moment for years. Your illness was no accident of nature. The implication struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Her mysterious ailment, the fever that had rapidly overtaken her 3 days prior, that had left her weakened and delirious until she had finally fallen into what appeared to be death, had been deliberate. Richard had poisoned her. The potion was meant to kill, not merely simulate death. Father Benedict continued, his voice trembling slightly. That you live is nothing short of divine intervention. God has spared you for a purpose, Your Majesty. Eleanor wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask how the priest could have known of such a plan and not warned her. But her body remained frustratingly unresponsive, capable only of the slightest movements that she dared not risk while anyone watched. I learned of it in confession, the king's confession, Father Benedict explained, as if sensing her unasked questions. Bound by sacred oath, I could not speak of it directly. I tried to warn you with cryptic messages, but I failed you, my queen. When I saw the signs of life in you tonight, I knew God had granted me a chance for redemption. Eleanor's mind raced. She recalled the strange conversation they had shared just days before her illness, when the confessor had spoken in riddles about the story of Lazarus and the importance of recognizing enemies disguised as loved ones. At the time, she had attributed his odd behavior to the advancing years clouding his mind. The king believes you will be entombed tomorrow, but I have bribed the royal physician, Father Benedict continued. He will declare that your body shows signs of unholy corruption and must be burned instead of buried, as is the custom with victims of certain plagues. During the preparation for burning, you will be secretly taken to the Abbey of St. Clare, where the sisters will nurse you back to health. A tremor of hope flickered within Eleanor's chest. This man, this servant of God whom she had always respected but never truly known, was risking everything to save her life. But why? What did he gain from such treachery against the king? As if reading her thoughts, Father Benedict sighed softly. I have served 3 kings in my lifetime, Your Majesty. I have heard confessions that would turn your blood to ice. But never have I heard one that so thoroughly shook my faith in the divine right of kings as Richard's plan for you and for the kingdom. He paused, glancing around to ensure they were still unobserved. The isolation of the church has been part of his strategy from the beginning. The mysterious daughter, this Rosalind, is merely a pawn in a greater game. There are forces at work here that extend beyond our borders, alliances being forged in blood rather than marriage. The royal confessor straightened, making the sign of the cross above Eleanor's body with shaking hands. I must go now before suspicion arises. Tomorrow, when they come for your body, remain as you are. Show no signs of life until you are safely away from the castle. The physician will administer a draught to strengthen you once you are in the sisters' care. With those words, Father Benedict stepped back from the bier and turned toward the guards at the entrance, gesturing for them to return. His face resumed the solemn mask of pious grief that he had worn throughout the funeral proceedings. Her Majesty's soul is prepared for judgment, he announced loudly enough for his voice to carry across the hall. May God receive her with mercy, and may her memory be a blessing to the realm. As the priest walked away, his sandals whispering against the stone floor, Eleanor felt something she had not experienced since awakening in her coffin. Hope, fragile but persistent, like the first green shoot breaking through snow-covered ground. She was not alone in her knowledge. The church, or at least this one representative of it, stood with her against whatever dark conspiracy had led to her near death. The sense of isolation that had crushed her spirit began to recede, replaced by a growing determination. If she could survive the night and the journey to St. Clare's, she would have time to recover her strength and uncover the full extent of Richard's betrayal. The thin veil between faith and treachery had never seemed so transparent. The king who had sworn before God to love and protect her had attempted to murder her. The priest, bound by sacred oath to keep confessions secret, had broken that vow to save her life. In this hall dedicated to holy rituals and ancient traditions, nothing was as it seemed. As night fully descended and the hall emptied of all but the ceremonial guards and prayer attendants, Eleanor fixed her gaze on the painted angels that adorned the ceiling above her. Their serene faces stared back at her, neither judging nor absolving. They, like her, were merely observers of the human drama unfolding beneath them, silent witnesses to the ambitions and betrayals that defined the mortal realm. By dawn, she would either be safely hidden among the Sisters of St. Clare's Abbey, or truly dead and beyond all earthly concerns. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, a strange calm settled over her spirit. Whatever happened, she was no longer merely a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She had become something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. Morning light filtered through the narrow windows of the chamber, casting golden patterns across the simple stone floor. Queen Eleanor sat upright in a modest wooden chair, her royal burial gown exchanged for the plain woolen dress of a novice. The Abbey of St. Clare stood perched on a rocky promontory overlooking the sea, 7 days' journey from the castle, isolated enough that news traveled slowly, if at all. Her rescue had unfolded exactly as Father Benedict had promised. The royal physician had declared her body touched by unholy corruption that required immediate burning rather than entombment. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor had been spirited away by loyal hands, smuggled from the castle in a covered cart, ostensibly carrying plague-tainted linens to be burned. She had remained perfectly still until the cart had passed beyond the city walls, where Father Benedict's trusted allies, a band of silent monks, had transferred her to a swifter carriage bound for St. Clare's. For 3 days, Eleanor had drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams, the lingering effects of the poison still coursing through her veins. The sisters had worked tirelessly, administering herbal remedies and cool compresses, praying over her through the darkest hours when her breathing had grown shallow and her pulse erratic. By the 4th day, her strength had begun to return, first in small measures, the ability to sit up, to sip broth, to speak in more than whispers, and then more substantially. Now, on the 7th day of her resurrection, Eleanor watched Sister Agnes approach with a rolled parchment clutched in her weathered hands. The elderly nun's face was a mask of concern, her normally serene features tightened with worry. "A messenger has arrived from the capital, Your Majesty," Sister Agnes said softly, her eyes darting nervously to the closed door. "He brings news that has spread throughout the kingdom." Eleanor straightened, ignoring the lingering weakness that made her limbs tremble with even the smallest exertion. "Tell me," she commanded, her voice finding its regal tone despite her diminished circumstances. Sister Agnes unrolled the parchment with trembling fingers. "The king has formally announced the existence of his daughter, Rosalind. The royal proclamation was read in every town square and village center 3 days ago. She is to be officially presented to the court during the midsummer festival." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she showed no other reaction. This was expected after all. The king had made his intentions clear during her funeral. "Is there more?" she asked, sensing the nun's hesitation. Sister Agnes nodded reluctantly. "The messenger says the entire kingdom speaks of nothing else. The girl's name echoes from tavern to noble house, from market stall to cathedral." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "They call her Isabel." "Isabel?" Eleanor repeated, the name striking an unexpected chord within her. "Not Rosalind." "The proclamation names her Isabel Rosalind Plantagenet," Sister Agnes confirmed. "But it is Isabel that has captured the people's imagination. They have already begun to call her the Daughter of Destiny. Songs about her are spreading through the countryside faster than spring fever." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this information. Isabel. The name carried echoes of her past, of connections she could not immediately place, but that tugged at her memory like persistent ghosts. "What do they say of this girl?" she asked, opening her eyes again to study the nun's face. What manner of princess has emerged from the shadows to capture my kingdom's heart? Sister Agnes hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the role of court gossip. They say she has eyes the color of summer skies and hair like spun gold. They say she speaks 4 languages fluently and plays the lute with the skill of a master minstrel. They say her laughter can charm birds from trees and her kindness would humble the saints. They say, Eleanor murmured bitterly. The people have always been quick to worship a pretty face and a new story. What else have you heard? What of her mother? Does this proclamation name the woman who bore the king's precious heir? The elderly nun shook her head. The proclamation states only that her mother was a noblewoman who died in childbirth, and that the king kept the child hidden to protect her from those who might use her as a pawn in political games. A harsh laugh escaped Eleanor's throat. How convenient. A dead mother cannot contradict the king's tale, can she? She rose from her chair, ignoring the weakness in her legs as she moved to the window. The vast expanse of the sea spread before her, its surface glittering like scattered diamonds beneath the midday sun. What of my death? What does the kingdom believe happened to their queen? Sister Agnes approached cautiously, standing a respectful distance from Eleanor's rigid back. The official announcement claims you succumbed to a wasting illness that had afflicted you in secret for many months. They say you asked the king to keep your suffering private, to spare the kingdom unnecessary grief. More lies, Eleanor whispered, her fingernails digging into the stone windowsill. He poisons me, then claims I died of natural causes while hiding my suffering out of nobility. The irony was almost too much to bear. And the people believe this tale? Most do, Sister Agnes admitted, though there are whispers among some of the older nobles who remember your vigor at the spring tournament. They question how such illness could have progressed so rapidly without visible signs. A small comfort, Eleanor thought, that at least some questioned the convenient timing of her demise, but questions alone would not expose the king's treachery or restore her to her rightful place. There is one more thing, Your Majesty, Sister Agnes added hesitantly, a detail that the messenger mentioned in passing, something he heard from a palace servant. Eleanor turned, fixing the nun with an intense gaze. Speak it. The girl, Isabel. They say she bears a striking resemblance to Lady Anne of Northwell. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow, confirming what she had begun to suspect during her funeral. Lady Anne, her closest companion during the early years of her marriage, the gentle soul who had eased her transition to court life, who had disappeared so suddenly 15 years ago with a mysterious ailment. Lady Anne, Eleanor repeated softly, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Anne's musical laugh, her skill with embroidery, her kind words when Eleanor had lost her first child. She was with child when she left court. I remember now. The loose gowns she began to favor, the way she declined wine at feasts, her sudden aversion to certain foods. All signs that Eleanor, in her grief over her own lost pregnancy, had failed to recognize at the time, or perhaps had subconsciously chosen to ignore. The timing would match, Sister Agnes observed carefully. 15 years, Eleanor murmured. Yes, it would match perfectly. She returned to her chair, sinking into it as the implications fully registered. Richard sent her away when her pregnancy became too difficult to hide. Perhaps he truly loved her. Perhaps that is why he could never fully love me. The bitter realization sat heavy in her chest. For years, she had believed Richard's assurances that their childlessness was a shared burden. She had blamed herself, endured painful treatments and humiliating examinations, prayed countless hours for divine intervention, all while he had a healthy child growing up in secret. I must see her, Eleanor declared suddenly, startling Sister Agnes with the force of her conviction. This Isabel. I must look upon the face of the girl who has replaced me in the kingdom's heart. But Your Majesty, the nun protested gently, to return to the capital would be to risk your life. The king believes you dead, if he discovers otherwise. I will not announce myself with trumpets and banners, Eleanor interrupted, a plan already forming in her mind. I will go in disguise, as a widow seeking the church's shelter. No one looks closely at a woman in mourning, with her face half hidden behind veils. Sister Agnes wrung her hands anxiously. Even so, It is a terrible risk. The king's spies are everywhere. If you are discovered, if I remain here, hidden away like a shameful secret while another woman's daughter takes my place, I might as well truly be dead." Eleanor countered, a new strength infusing her voice. "I must know the truth, all of it. About Isabel, about Lady Anne, about the conspiracy that nearly claimed my life." She rose again, more steadily this time, and moved to the small wooden chest that contained the few possessions the sisters had provided her. "I will need traveling clothes, a horse, and perhaps one companion." She glanced at Sister Agnes. "Someone who can pass as a servant to a minor noblewoman of no particular significance." The elderly nun sighed deeply, resignation settling across her features. "I shall speak with Mother Superior. There is a young novice, Sister Martha, who has not yet taken her final vows. She knows the roads well and has family in the capital who might provide shelter." Eleanor nodded, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "Good, we leave at dawn." She turned back to the window, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the sea met the sky in a seamless line. "Isabel," she whispered the name again, testing its weight on her tongue. "The daughter of destiny." The name echoed in her mind, stirring memories that had lain dormant for years. Somewhere in the recesses of her mind, a connection waited to be made, a truth more shocking than even the king's betrayal. Eleanor could feel it lingering just beyond her grasp, a shadow of recognition that refused to take solid form. But soon she would know. She would look into the eyes of this girl who shared her husband's blood, and perhaps then, the final pieces of this royal deception would fall into place. The journey back to the capital had taken 6 days, each mile bringing Eleanor closer to the truth she both craved and feared. Disguised in the modest garb of a widowed noblewoman, her face partially concealed by gray mourning veils, she had passed unrecognized through villages where her royal portrait hung in town halls and taverns. Sister Martha, a quiet young woman with keen eyes and steady hands, had proven an ideal companion, maintaining their cover story with natural ease whenever questioned. They had arrived under cover of darkness, taking lodging in a small inn near the eastern gate, far from the palace but close enough to hear the latest court gossip. For 2 days, Eleanor had gathered information, listening to tavern talk and market chatter, building a picture of how the kingdom had transformed in her absence. King Richard had wasted no time establishing his daughter's position. Preparations for the Midsummer Festival were underway, with the formal presentation of Princess Isabel as its centerpiece. Tonight, Eleanor had made her boldest move yet. Dressed as a castle servant borrowed from Sister Martha's cousin who worked in the laundry, she had slipped into the royal residence through servants' passages she had once known as intimately as the lines on her palm. The risk was enormous. Many staff would recognize their queen despite the plain clothes and subdued demeanor. But Eleanor had counted on the human tendency to see only what they expected to see. No one would look for a dead queen among the living. Her gamble had paid off. For 3 hours, she had moved through the castle like a ghost, listening at doors, observing from shadows, reacquainting herself with the rhythm of the place that had been her home for more than 20 years. The servants' gossip had been even more illuminating than the tavern rumors. Talk of the king's changed demeanor, of his sudden interest in renovating the queen's former chambers, of Princess Isabel's gentle nature that had already won over much of the household staff. Now Eleanor stood in her husband's private study, a chamber few were permitted to enter without explicit invitation. The room was empty, its occupant attending a council meeting that would likely continue well into the night. A single lamp burned on the massive oak desk, casting long shadows across the book-lined walls and illuminating the royal seal pressed into documents awaiting the king's signature. Eleanor moved cautiously, her heart pounding against her ribs as she surveyed the room. It remained largely as she remembered, the same heavy curtains framing leaded glass windows, the same worn carpet from the eastern kingdoms, the same collection of maps and navigation instruments that had always fascinated Richard. Yet subtle changes marked the passage of time and shifting priorities. New books added to the shelves, different parchments spread across the desk, the addition of a smaller writing table in the corner that had not been there before. What was she looking for? Eleanor wasn't entirely certain. some evidence of the conspiracy against her perhaps, some insight into Richard's true feelings about their marriage and her supposed death. Some clue about Isabel that might explain the nagging sense of familiarity that had haunted Eleanor since hearing the girl's name. She moved to the desk first, scanning the documents by lamplight. Trade agreements, military reports, diplomatic correspondence, the mundane machinery of governance continued uninterrupted by her absence. Nothing revealing, nothing personal. Frustrated, Eleanor turned her attention to the bookshelves, running her fingers along leather-bound spines, searching for anything unusual. In the third bookcase, behind a row of ancient historical texts that Richard rarely consulted, her fingers brushed against something that didn't belong, a small leather case tucked away where casual visitors would never notice it. Curious, Eleanor carefully extracted it, feeling its unexpected weight in her palm. The case was locked, but the tiny key hung from a thin chain attached to its side. With trembling fingers, Eleanor unlocked the case and opened it. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, lay a miniature portrait, an exquisitely detailed painting of a young woman with honey-gold hair and eyes the color of forget-me-nots. The artist had captured a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth, a hint of knowing wisdom in her gaze that seemed beyond her years. The craftsmanship was masterful, every brushstroke deliberate, conveying not just likeness but essence. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The face was unmistakably that of Lady Anne, younger than Eleanor remembered her, perhaps painted before they had met, but undeniably the same woman who had been her closest companion during those early, difficult years at court. The portrait had been treated with reverence, preserved with care that spoke of deep attachment. The scent of aged wood and old paint filled Eleanor's nostrils as she held the portrait closer to the lamp. Lady Anne looked back at her with those striking blue eyes, captured forever in a moment of quiet joy. Had Richard commissioned this before their marriage? Had he kept it hidden all these years, a secret reminder of his true love? The weight of discovery pressed against Eleanor's chest, forcing the air from her lungs in a painful rush. The portrait had been protected with more care than any image of herself as queen. None of her official portraits had been treated with such tenderness, such intimate devotion. They had hung in public halls, symbols of royalty rather than objects of affection. As she moved to return the portrait to its hiding place, Eleanor noticed something else behind the books, a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Her curiosity overwhelming caution, she removed it and placed it on the desk beside the lamp. Unlike the portrait case, this box bore no lock, secured only by a simple latch that opened at her touch. Inside lay a collection of folded letters tied with faded blue ribbon, a pressed flower preserved between pieces of thin glass, a small silver ring set with a single pearl, and, most surprisingly, a lock of golden hair wrapped in silk. Eleanor hesitated, her hand hovering over these intimate treasures. To read the letters would be to intrude on private memories that Richard had carefully preserved, memories he had never shared with her despite their years together. But had he not intruded upon her life far more violently? Had he not poisoned her and left her for dead? The momentary qualm of conscience passed, replaced by cold determination. Eleanor untied the ribbon and selected the topmost letter, unfolding the delicate parchment with care. The handwriting was unmistakably Lady Anne's, the same elegant script that had adorned notes and messages exchanged during their friendship. The date at the top showed it had been written 17 years ago, before Eleanor's marriage to Richard had been arranged. "My dearest heart," the letter began, "the news of your betrothal has reached even our remote estate. They say the princess is beautiful and gentle, a suitable match for a future king. I write not in jealousy but in sorrow, knowing that what we shared must now truly end. I understand the necessities of your position, the demands of crown and kingdom that allow no place for personal desire." Eleanor's hands trembled as she read, each word confirming what she had begun to suspect. Richard and Anne had loved each other deeply before duty had forced him into a political marriage. Their relationship had not been a mere dalliance or court affair, but a genuine attachment severed by the cold calculations of royal alliance. She replaced the first letter and unfolded another, this one dated just after Eleanor's arrival at court. "Seeing you with her daily is a sweet torment I must endure," Anne had written. She is everything they claimed, kind and worthy of your respect. In another life, I might have called her friend without the shadow of our secret hanging between us. I pray for strength to serve her faithfully while loving you silently." The irony struck Eleanor with brutal force. Anne had indeed become her friend, her most trusted companion during those first isolated months. Had every kind word, every shared confidence, every moment of seeming friendship been tainted by this hidden love? Had Anne's every gesture of support been shadowed by secret longing for Eleanor's husband? As she reached for the third letter, Eleanor heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Hastily, she refolded the letters, retied the ribbon, and returned both box and portrait case to their hiding places behind the books. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she extinguished the lamp and slipped behind the heavy curtains at the window, pressing herself against the cold glass. The door opened, and the familiar sound of Richard's footsteps entered the room. Eleanor held her breath, fighting the urge to confront him immediately. Not yet. She needed to know more, needed to understand the full extent of the deception before revealing herself. "Your Majesty," a servant's voice called from the doorway. "Yes, what is it?" Richard replied, his tone distracted. "Princess Isabel asks if you will join her for breakfast in the garden tomorrow. She says the roses are at their peak and reminds her of—" "Tell her yes." Richard interrupted, his voice softening in a way Eleanor had rarely heard during their marriage. "I'll join her at the usual hour." The servant departed, leaving Richard alone in the study. For several long minutes he moved about the room, retrieving books, shuffling papers. Then, to Eleanor's horror, he approached the very bookcase where she had found the hidden treasures. Through a tiny gap in the curtains, she watched as he extracted the portrait case, opened it, and gazed at Anne's image in the light of the lamp he had relit. His expression transformed, the lines of authority melting into something vulnerable and genuine. With a gentle finger, he traced the painted features before returning the portrait to its sanctuary. "Soon," he whispered to the empty room, "soon her daughter will have everything she deserves." Eleanor remained frozen behind the curtain as Richard finally departed, taking the lamp with him and leaving the study in darkness. Only when his footsteps had faded completely did she emerge from her hiding place, her mind racing with revelations and new questions. Isabel was indeed Anne's daughter. That much was now certain. But there was something in the way Richard had looked at that portrait, something in his whispered promise, that suggested deeper currents beneath the surface of this royal intrigue. As Eleanor slipped from the study and made her way back through the servants' passages, one thought burned brighter than all others. She needed to see Isabel with her own eyes. Only then might she understand the final piece of this puzzle that had nearly cost her life. The castle gardens had always been Eleanor's refuge, a place where courtly intrigue seemed to dissipate among the carefully tended roses and whispering fountains. Now, as dawn broke over the eastern walls, bathing the grounds in soft golden light, she found herself there again, not as queen, but as shadow, a specter lurking behind the sculpted hedges. 3 weeks had passed since the kingdom had laid her to rest. 3 weeks since poison had slid down her throat in what she now knew had been a calculated attempt to remove her permanently from the throne. The castle had already begun to forget her. Servants who had once bowed at her approach now hurried past the disguised figure of a common maid without a second glance. Word had spread throughout the castle that morning. Princess Isabel would breakfast with the king in the rose garden at the 8th hour. Eleanor had arrived before the servants, positioning herself strategically near the hedge maze where she could observe without being seen. The gardeners had been at work since first light, sweeping the stone pathways, trimming errant stems, ensuring every bloom displayed its perfect face toward the ornate table set beneath the ancient oak tree. The air hummed with unspoken tension. Guards stood at attention along the garden walls, more than would normally be present for a simple breakfast. Courtiers found reasons to stroll nearby paths, their casual manner betrayed by the frequency with which they glanced toward the empty table. Even the birds seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, their usual morning songs intermittently punctuated by watchful silences. "She's coming," a kitchen maid whispered as she hurried past with a silver tray of fresh bread. "The princess is on her way." Eleanor pressed deeper into the shadows, her heart thundering against her ribs. After days of speculation and second-hand descriptions, She would finally see the girl who had replaced her, the daughter Richard had hidden for 15 years while Eleanor suffered through miscarriages and the kingdom's disappointment. A gentle murmur arose from the courtiers as the garden doors opened. King Richard entered first, his powerful frame draped in less formal attire than his usual court garments, a concession perhaps to the intimate nature of the breakfast. He looked different somehow. The stern lines of his face had softened, and he moved with an almost youthful energy that Eleanor had not witnessed in years. Behind him walked a slender figure that caused Eleanor's breath to catch painfully in her throat. Princess Isabel entered the garden like spring personified. Her gown, the pale blue of a cloudless sky, flowed around her graceful form as she moved. Golden hair, not the rich auburn of Richard's or the wheat blonde of Anne's, but something uniquely her own, was arranged simply, adorned only with a circlet of small white flowers. But it was her face that seized Eleanor's attention and held it with merciless force. The girl was beautiful, yes, but it was not her beauty that made Eleanor's knees weaken beneath her servant's dress. It was the unmistakable familiarity of her features, the high cheekbones, the delicate curve of her jaw, the particular way her eyes crinkled as she smiled. Eleanor knew those features intimately. She saw them every morning in her looking glass. "Father," Isabel said, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. "You look tired. Are you not sleeping well?" Richard's laugh held genuine warmth. "The concerns of kingship rarely respect the hour, my dear. But seeing you brightens even the darkest morning." He pulled out a chair for her with his own hands, a gesture he had never once performed for Eleanor in all their years of marriage. As Isabel sat, a shaft of sunlight broke through the oak's canopy, illuminating her profile in a way that only strengthened the impossible resemblance. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand against the rough stone of the garden wall to steady herself. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet as fragments of memory resurfaced. Conversations half heard, documents glimpsed, servants' whispers abruptly silenced when she entered rooms. The truth had always been there, hovering at the edges of her awareness, too monstrous to acknowledge. Isabel was not merely Anne's daughter, nor was she simply Richard's child with a former lover. The resemblance could not be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking on Eleanor's part. Isabel was her daughter, her child, the baby girl she had delivered 16 years ago, the infant declared stillborn after a difficult birth that had left Eleanor unconscious for days. "How do you find your new chambers?" Richard asked, accepting a cup of wine from a hovering servant. "I've instructed the staff to make any changes you desire." "They're lovely, Father," Isabel replied, her smile revealing a dimple in her left cheek, Eleanor's dimple. "Though I admit they feel rather grand for someone raised in a country manor. The view of the eastern fields reminds me of home." "This is your home now," Richard said firmly. "The people already adore you. You've brought light back to a court that has existed too long in shadow." Eleanor's fingernails dug into her palms, drawing blood. Her child had not died. Richard had taken her, stolen her, and given her to Anne to raise in secret. For 16 years, Eleanor had mourned a daughter who lived, had blamed her body for failures that were actually her husband's betrayals. The realization crashed through her like a physical force. She had been robbed not just of her throne and her marriage, but of motherhood itself, the very thing whose absence had defined and diminished her in the eyes of the court and kingdom. A serving girl approached with a platter of fresh fruit, passing close enough to Eleanor's hiding place that she instinctively turned away. The movement caught Isabel's attention. Her gaze drifted toward the hedges, lingering for a moment on the spot where Eleanor stood frozen. A curious expression crossed the girl's features. Not recognition, but something akin to déjà vu, as if she had glimpsed something familiar but couldn't quite place it. Eleanor held her breath, willing herself to become invisible, while her heart screamed to run to the child she had never known. "Is something wrong?" Richard asked, following his daughter's gaze. Isabel shook her head, returning her attention to the table. "No, Father. Just a shadow among the roses that caught my eye." A shadow. That was what Eleanor had become, a shade lingering at the edges of a life that had once been hers. The irony was not lost on her as she watched Richard reach across the table to pat his daughter's hand affectionately. "The council is pleased with your progress in the state matters we've discussed," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "Lord Chancellor Blackwood particularly commented on your understanding of the Northern Treaty provisions." Isabel nodded, her expression shifting to something more serious. "The terms seem unnecessarily harsh toward the Highland clans. I've been reading their petitions, and I believe we could modify the timber rights without compromising our position." Eleanor watched in astonishment as her daughter, conversed with the ease and insight of someone trained from birth for governance. Richard was not merely acknowledging Isabel as his child, he was actively preparing her for rulership. Perhaps, Richard mused, though concessions must be balanced with strength. The northern lords respect only firm boundaries. He paused, studying Isabel's face with unconcealed pride. "But we can discuss this further at council tomorrow. This morning is for gentler matters." As their conversation continued, shifting to music and literature, Eleanor remained rooted in place, each word exchanged between father and daughter another blow to her already shattered reality. The bond between them was genuine, built on years she could never reclaim. Whatever Richard's motives for the deception, it was clear that he truly cared for Isabel. A bell tolled in the distance, signaling the approach of the 9th hour. Richard sighed reluctantly. "I must attend to the Eastland ambassadors. Will you join the ladies in the solar this afternoon? The Countess of Westmere has expressed particular interest in making your acquaintance." "Of course, father," Isabel replied, rising gracefully, "though I hope to visit the Royal Library first. Master Aldwyn mentioned some historical chronicles that might help me understand the southern provinces better." Richard beamed with approval. "Always studying, always learning. You remind me so much of—" He stopped abruptly, something like guilt flickering across his features. "Of me?" Eleanor thought bitterly. "She reminds you of me." As father and daughter departed the garden, walking arm in arm along the stone path, Eleanor emerged slightly from her hiding place. The servants immediately descended upon the abandoned breakfast table, clearing away the barely touched food and rearranging the setting for the day's next royal engagement. None of them noticed the plain-dressed woman who slipped away through the hedge maze, her face wet with silent tears, her mind racing with a truth more devastating than anything she could have imagined. Her daughter lived. The child she had grieved for 16 years breathed and laughed and studied and walked these same garden paths. A stranger to her own mother, raised by another woman, loyal to the man who had orchestrated the monstrous deception. The confrontation that Eleanor had imagined, the righteous fury she would unleash upon Richard when the moment was right, now seemed hopelessly inadequate. This was no longer about a throne usurped or a marriage betrayed. This was about a mother separated from her child through the cruelest of lies. As she made her way through the servants' corridors, Eleanor's shock gradually hardened into something more dangerous than mere anger. The time for hiding in shadows was ending. The queen was not dead, and soon, very soon, the king would learn what it truly meant to awaken a mother's wrath. The old chapel stood abandoned at the edge of the royal forest, its stone walls mantled with ivy, its once grand windows now empty arches open to the elements. Consecrated ground forgotten by all but the most devout, it had served as Eleanor's sanctuary for 3 days since her discovery in the garden. Sister Martha had secured supplies through her cousin, creating a modest camp within the chapel's crumbling nave, where the former queen could plan her next move away from prying eyes. Tonight, Eleanor paced the worn flagstones, her shadow stretching and contracting in the flickering light of a single oil lamp. Her mind churned with the impossible truth. Isabel, the daughter she had believed dead for 16 years, lived. The child had been stolen from her arms while she lay unconscious after a difficult birth, proclaimed stillborn by physicians who served the king's will rather than God's truth. All the while, Lady Anne, her trusted friend, had raised Eleanor's own flesh and blood in secret. The betrayal transcended ordinary treachery. It was a violation so profound that Eleanor still struggled to comprehend its full dimensions. Not content with stealing her child, Richard had ultimately attempted to eliminate Eleanor herself when it suited his plans to bring Isabel forward as his heir. "Your Majesty," Sister Martha's soft voice interrupted Eleanor's thoughts. The young novice stood in the arched doorway, her face partially obscured by her gray hood. "She's here." Eleanor ceased her pacing, straightening her simple dress with trembling hands. "Send her in." The novice disappeared, returning moments later with a cloaked figure who moved hesitantly into the lamplight. Marta, Eleanor's former personal maid, had aged visibly in the short weeks since the funeral. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally immaculate appearance had given way to a haggard dishevelment that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. "My queen," Marta whispered, falling to her knees when she recognized Eleanor. "They said you were dead. I prepared your body myself. I closed your eyes. Her voice broke, tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. "Rise, old friend." Eleanor helped the maid to her feet, guiding her to a stone bench beneath one of the broken windows. "I need your help now more than ever." "Anything, Your Majesty. My life is yours." Eleanor studied the woman who had attended her for 15 years, who had wiped her tears after each miscarriage, who had dressed her for countless court functions and undressed her afterward in chambers where Eleanor could finally release the rigid control expected of a queen. If anyone in the castle would know the truth, it would be Marta. "Tell me about the night my daughter was born," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her chest. Marta's eyes widened, her gaze darting toward the chapel entrance as if fearing eavesdroppers. "Your Majesty." "The truth, Marta, all of it. I've seen her. I know she lives." The maid's shoulders slumped, a visible burden of secrecy lifting even as new fear took its place. "It happened as I always suspected," she murmured. "The king swore all of us to silence that night, on pain of death." Eleanor sat beside her, taking the maid's gnarled hands in her own. "Start at the beginning." Marta drew a deep, shuddering breath. "The birth was difficult. That much was true. You hemorrhaged severely afterward and fell unconscious. The midwife feared for your life." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "But the child, a girl with a dusting of golden hair in your eyes, she lived. She cried strongly, with healthy lungs and all her fingers and toes. And Richard took her," Eleanor supplied, her voice hollow. Marta nodded miserably. "He entered the birthing chamber with guards. The midwife presented him with his daughter, and he looked at the child with such strange intensity. Not joy, not pride, but something calculating." She shuddered at the memory. "He ordered everyone from the room except his personal physician. When they emerged an hour later, the physician announced that the princess had been born dead, and that Your Majesty was not to be told immediately for fear the shock would worsen your condition. But you knew. It wasn't a question." "I suspected," Marta corrected. "The midwife disappeared that same night, sent to a convent in the southern provinces with a generous donation from the royal treasury. One of the chambermaids who had assisted with the birth drowned in the river 3 days later. They called it an accident, but..." She left the implication hanging in the still air of the chapel. "And the child?" Eleanor prompted, though she already knew the answer. "Whispers reached me months later through a kitchen boy who delivered supplies to a remote hunting lodge. Lady Anne had taken up residence there, along with a nursemaid and an infant girl. I pieced it together over time, but I had no proof, only suspicions too dangerous to voice." Eleanor rose, moving to the broken window where a sliver of moon hung in the night sky. The same moon that had witnessed her daughter's birth, that had illuminated the road along which her child had been carried away to be raised by another woman. "Did she know?" Eleanor asked, her back to Marta. Did Anne know whose child she was raising? A heavy silence filled the chapel before Marta answered. "I believe she must have, Your Majesty. The resemblance, even in infancy. Anyone who knew you both would see it." The confirmation twisted like a knife in Eleanor's heart. Anne, her confidant, her support through years of loss and disappointment, had willingly participated in the theft of her child. "I need to speak with her," Eleanor said suddenly, turning back to face Marta. "With Isabel. Alone." Marta's face paled. "Your Majesty, the risk can be managed," Eleanor interrupted. "I've had nothing but time to think, Marta. I need you to arrange a meeting, somewhere private, somewhere the king won't know. It won't be easy, The princess is heavily guarded, her schedule closely monitored. The king rarely lets her out of his sight. But not never, Eleanor pointed out. You said she visits the royal library. Does she go alone? Marta considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. Not alone, no. But her guards remain at the door. Inside, only Master Aldwin, the royal librarian, attends her, and he is old, nearly blind, and sleeps more often than not when she studies. When does she next visit? Tomorrow afternoon after the midday meal. The king will be meeting with the guild masters, a lengthy affair that cannot be postponed. Eleanor nodded, a plan forming in her mind. The library has the hidden alcove behind the astronomy section. The late king used it for private study, though few remember it now. I know it, Marta confirmed. A narrow space concealed by the rotating shelves. I cleaned it regularly in your early years at court, though it fell out of use after the old king's death. Can you lure Isabel there without raising suspicion? The maid considered for a moment. I could leave a rare book there, perhaps one of the illuminated histories she's been studying. Master Aldwin trusts me. He would not question my presence in the library. I could mention to the princess that I've found something of interest. She nodded slowly. Yes, it could work. Then we have our plan, Eleanor said, a flutter of nervous anticipation rising in her chest. After 16 years of separation, after believing her only daughter dead and buried, she would finally speak with her child. Your Majesty, Marta said hesitantly. What will you tell her? The truth could shatter her world. Eleanor had asked herself the same question repeatedly since discovering Isabel's identity. The girl believed herself to be Anne's daughter, raised in secret for her own protection. To learn that her entire life had been constructed on lies, that her true mother stood before her, a woman officially dead and buried, would be a shock beyond measure. I don't know, Eleanor admitted softly. Part of me wants to reveal everything, to reclaim her as my own, to expose Richard's treachery to the entire kingdom. Another part, she hesitated. Another part fears what such knowledge might do to her. She seems happy, confident. The court embraces her. The kingdom celebrates her. And she has been prepared to rule, Marta added gently. Lady Anne raised her with extraordinary care. The princess is accomplished in languages, history, music, all the skills a future queen requires. The irony was not lost on Eleanor. Her daughter had received the exact upbringing she herself would have provided, perhaps even superior, given that Anne had been free to focus entirely on the child without the distractions of royal duties. Tomorrow, Eleanor said with finality, I will look into my daughter's eyes and decide what truth she deserves to hear. She turned back to the window, gazing at the distant silhouette of the castle against the night sky. For now, return before your absence is noted. Tell no one what you've seen or heard tonight. Marta rose, bowing deeply before her queen. I have kept your secrets for 16 years, Your Majesty. I will not fail you now. After the maid had departed, Eleanor remained at the window, her thoughts a turbulent sea of possibility and doubt. Tomorrow she would stand face to face with the daughter stolen from her arms. Would she see recognition in those eyes? Would some primal bond of mother and child transcend the years of separation and deceit? Sister Martha approached silently, offering a cup of warmed wine. You should rest, Your Majesty. Tomorrow will demand all your strength. Eleanor accepted the cup, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Tell me, sister, you who have studied God's teachings, is it a sin to reclaim what was wrongfully taken? Or is the greater sin to disrupt a life built innocently upon lies? The novice considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The scriptures tell us that truth shall set us free, but they also counsel wisdom in how and when truth is revealed. She met Eleanor's gaze directly. Perhaps the question is not what is right for you, or even what is right for the princess, but what serves the greater good of all concerned. Eleanor nodded slowly, turning the cup between her palms. And if those goods cannot be reconciled, if what heals one heart breaks another, then you must decide which healing carries the greater weight, Sister Martha replied simply. You are still queen, whether the world acknowledges it or not. A queen's first duty has always been to her people, even when that people numbers only one. As darkness deepened around the abandoned chapel, Eleanor contemplated this wisdom. Tomorrow she would meet her daughter not as queen to princess, or even as mother to child, but as one woman to another. And in that meeting, she would discover whether 16 years of separation could be bridged by the truth, or whether some chasms were too wide for even a mother's love to cross. The Royal Library stood as a testament to generations of scholarly kings, its vaulted ceiling soaring 3 stories above polished marble floors, its walls lined with thousands of leather-bound volumes collected from across known lands. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams and casting rainbow patterns through crystal prisms hung strategically to protect the precious manuscripts from direct light. Eleanor waited in the hidden alcove, her heart pounding so forcefully she feared it might be heard through the revolving bookcase that concealed her presence. She had entered at dawn, long before the library opened to court scholars, slipping through passages that had once been as familiar to her as her own chambers. Now, as midday approached, she listened intently for footsteps that would herald her daughter's arrival. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. For 16 years, she had mourned a child she believed dead. Now that child was alive, flourishing, and Eleanor found herself hidden away, a ghost afraid to be seen. She smoothed the folds of her simple dress, a noblewoman's attire rather than royal garments, and touched the small silver pendant at her throat, the only piece of jewelry she had managed to keep during her escape from the castle. It bore the symbol of motherhood, an intricately designed knot with no beginning and no end. A sound from the main library caught her attention, the heavy oak doors opening, followed by the distinctive tap of Master Aldwin's cane against a marble. The old librarian's voice carried clearly to her hiding place. "Princess, I've arranged the provincial histories as you requested. The eastern territories are to your left, the western to your right. Will you require anything else?" "No, thank you, Master Aldwin." The voice, Isabel's voice, sent a jolt through Eleanor's body. "I shall call if I need assistance." "Very well, Your Highness. I shall be at my desk, resting my eyes." A soft laugh followed, musical, genuine, achingly familiar. "Of course, Master. Rest well." Footsteps approached Eleanor's hiding place, lighter than the librarian's shuffling gait, more purposeful. Through a narrow gap in the revolving shelves, Eleanor caught glimpses of her daughter moving between tables laden with opened manuscripts, her slender fingers trailing reverently across ancient parchments. Isabel wore a gown of deep forest green today, its simple elegance highlighting her graceful form as she moved. Her golden hair was braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, the same style Eleanor had favored at her age, though she doubted the girl knew this. From this distance, the resemblance between them was even more striking than it had been in the garden. The same high cheekbones, the same determined set of the jaw, the same way of tilting her head slightly when concentrating. Eleanor watched as Marta entered carrying a stack of documents. The faithful maid curtsied to the princess before speaking in hushed tones, gesturing subtly toward the astronomy section where the hidden alcove was located. Isabel nodded, following as Marta led her toward the revolving bookcase. The maid made a show of searching for something among the astronomy texts, then exclaimed softly as if discovering a treasure. "This might interest your highness," Marta said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "A rare celestial map showing the conjunction that occurred during your birth year. The late queen commissioned it specifically." "The queen?" Interest sparked in Isabel's voice. "Queen Eleanor had an interest in astronomy?" "Among many scholarly pursuits, Your Highness. Few knew of her private studies. This particular map was kept in a special collection. Here." Marta's practiced fingers found the hidden mechanism that activated the revolving shelves. The bookcase turned smoothly on its central axis, revealing the small, circular chamber beyond, and Eleanor, standing in its center, face to face with her daughter for the first time since infancy. Isabel gasped, instinctively stepping backward. Marta quickly closed the passage behind them, leaving mother and daughter alone in the hidden alcove illuminated only by a single oil lamp and thin shafts of light from concealed air vents near the ceiling. "Who are you?" Isabel's voice was steady despite her evident shock, her right hand moving subtly toward the small dagger noble ladies often carried at their belts. "Why have you been brought here to meet me in secret?" Eleanor had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but now that it had arrived, words failed her. How did one begin such a conversation? What possible introduction could prepare this girl for the truth that would follow? "My name is Eleanor," she said simply, deciding that truth, delivered gradually, was the only possible path. Isabel's eyes widened, her gaze sweeping over Eleanor's features with new intensity. "You share a name with the late queen." "I do not merely share her name." Eleanor took a careful step forward, keeping her hands visible to avoid frightening the girl. "I am Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen of these lands, wife to King Richard, and your mother." The color drained from Isabel's face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The queen is dead, and my mother was Lady Anne of Northwell, who died giving birth to me." "Both statements are false," Eleanor replied gently. "I did not die, though your father, our king, intended that I should. And Lady Anne, though she raised you as her own, was not the woman who brought you into this world." Isabel shook her head, backing against the curved wall of the alcove. "This is madness. Or treachery. Guards." "They cannot hear you," Eleanor said. "This chamber was designed for absolute privacy. Kings have discussed matters of state here for generations without fear of being overheard." "Then I shall leave." Isabel turned toward the bookcase, searching for the mechanism that would release her from this unsettling encounter. "Before you go," Eleanor said quickly, "look at me. Truly look. What do you see?" Despite her evident desire to escape, something in Eleanor's tone made Isabel pause. She turned slowly, her gaze reluctantly meeting the older woman's. For several long moments she studied Eleanor's face in silence, her expression shifting from fear to confusion to the first glimmers of uncertain recognition. "A resemblance," she admitted finally. "But that proves nothing. Many nobles share bloodlines." Eleanor slowly removed a small locket from around her neck, different from the pendant she wore. "This contains a lock of hair, the only piece of you I was permitted to keep after being told you had died at birth. Open it." Hesitantly, Isabel accepted the locket, her fingers trembling slightly as she released the tiny clasp. Inside lay a curl of baby-fine golden hair, preserved for 16 years in its silver prison. "This means nothing," she insisted, though her voice had lost its conviction. "A mother's grief, perhaps, keeping a memento of a lost child. But that child was not me." "You were born during the summer solstice," Eleanor continued softly. "A difficult birth that left me unconscious for days afterward. When I finally woke, they told me my daughter, my only living child after 5 failed pregnancies, had been stillborn." Isabel's composure wavered visibly. "The solstice is my birthday," she acknowledged. "But you have a small birthmark shaped like a crescent moon behind your right ear," Eleanor continued, "and another barely visible at the base of your left thumb." Isabel's hand moved unconsciously to her ear, then jerked away as if burned. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I memorized every inch of you during the few moments I held you before exhaustion claimed me," Eleanor replied, her voice breaking. "Because a mother does not forget the child of her body, even when separated by years and lies." A tense silence fell between them, disturbed only by the distant sounds of the library beyond their hidden sanctuary. Isabel's face had become a battlefield of conflicting emotions, disbelief warring with dawning recognition, anger clashing with a more complex yearning she perhaps did not yet understand. "If what you say is true," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "then everything I've believed about my life is a lie. The woman I mourned as my mother, Lady Anne, was my closest friend at court," Eleanor supplied, "and I believe she loved you deeply, raised you with care and wisdom. Her deception does not negate her devotion." "And my father, the king?" Isabel's voice hardened. "If you are who you claim to be, then he orchestrated a conspiracy that spanned 16 years, Eleanor confirmed. "He took you from me, proclaimed you dead, gave you to Anne to raise in secret, and when the time suited his purposes, he poisoned me to make way for your introduction to court." Isabel shook her head vehemently. No. He would not. He could not. She faltered, memories clearly surfacing that challenged her defense. Why? Why would he do such a thing? It was the question Eleanor herself had grappled with since discovering the truth. Power, she said simply. Control over the succession without the complications of my political alliances. My family connections to the southern kingdoms have always been a double-edged sword for Richard, valuable for trade and military support, but threatening to his absolute authority. With me raised in secret, Isabel continued the thought, her quick mind assembling the pieces. He could shape my loyalties completely. No divided allegiances, no foreign influences. Her eyes narrowed. And with you gone, no one to challenge his narrative when he presented me to the court. Eleanor nodded, a surge of pride mixing with her sorrow. This daughter of hers had inherited more than physical features. She possessed the same sharp intellect, the same political acumen that had made Eleanor both valued and feared in the royal court. What do you want from me? Isabel asked, her composure returning, though her voice remained unsteady. Why reveal yourself now? What purpose does this truth serve except to shatter my world? The question struck at the heart of Eleanor's dilemma. What did she want? Revenge against Richard? Acknowledgement as the rightful queen? Or something more personal, more primal? Recognition from the daughter who had been stolen from her. I want justice, Eleanor said finally. Not merely for myself, but for you. For the relationship we were denied. For the truth that was buried beneath years of careful lies. I want you to know who you truly are, not merely Richard's daughter and heir, but the child of a queen who never stopped grieving your loss. Isabel turned away, moving to one of the narrow air vents where she stood in a shaft of dusty light, her profile limned in gold. When she spoke again, her voice held the measured control of someone raised to conceal emotion. You are asking me to choose between the father who has guided me my entire life, however deceptively, and a mother returned from the dead, whom I have no memory of ever knowing. I'm asking you to acknowledge truth, Eleanor corrected gently. What you do with that truth is your choice. I have survived death itself. I can survive your rejection if that is your decision. The simple dignity of this statement seemed to reach Isabel in a way that accusations against her father had not. She turned back, studying Eleanor with new intensity. You could have exposed everything publicly, she observed. Created a scandal that would shake the kingdom to its foundations. Instead, you sought me out privately. Why? Because some truths are too personal for public revelation, Eleanor answered. And because whatever else he has done, Richard has given you what I could not. A childhood free from the burdens of court life, an education worthy of your intelligence, and now a clear path to the throne. Tears gathered in Isabel's eyes for the first time. What happens now? It was the question Eleanor had asked herself through sleepless nights in the abandoned chapel. The answer came with surprising clarity. Now, she said, we find a path forward that honors the truth without destroying what good has come from the lies. Together. Queen Eleanor's journey from the darkness of betrayal to the light of truth reminds us that even in our most vulnerable moments, courage can transform our deepest wounds into unexpected strength. When faced with unimaginable deception, she chose not blind vengeance, but wisdom, understanding that some battles are won not with swords and armies, but with truth spoken at precisely the right moment. Would you have found such grace in the face of such profound betrayal? Or would rage have consumed your chance for reconciliation? The bonds between mother and child transcend even the most elaborate deceptions. Eleanor's story challenges us to consider what truly matters when everything we believed is suddenly questioned. Is it justice we seek, or healing? Is it the punishment of those who wronged us, or the reclamation of what was stolen? Sometimes the bravest path forward isn't in destroying the life built on lies, but in carefully weaving truth back into its fabric, preserving what is precious while discarding what is false. If you found yourself moved by this tale of resurrection and redemption, remember that stories like these survive only when shared. Take a moment to support our storytelling by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing Eleanor's journey with others who might find comfort or courage in her remarkable tale. After all, In a world where truth is often sacrificed for convenience, perhaps the most powerful act of rebellion is simply to remember, and to ensure that others remember too.